because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor, knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight, the pressure of success is...
What's up, YouTube? Create Your Fate here, and you're watching Ancient Knowledge, Spiritual Wisdom. We often have trouble explaining to our loved ones, or explaining to people we live with, exactly what witchcraft is, right? Exactly, that we're not satanic, that it has nothing to do with devil worship, those sorts of things, right? And it was me personally when I first began my path, okay? A lot of people have difficulty explaining their beliefs to their loved ones without starting a big heated debate, which admittedly is hard. There's more similarities than there are really differences between the roots of where Christianity came from and the roots of where witchcraft comes from. Both Christianity and witchcraft do come from the same root, okay? That root being ancient Egypt. Now, some argue that magic originated in ancient Mesopotamia. That's debatable because it's recently been uncovered that ancient Egypt is actually 3,000 years older than previously thought, which only leaves a 1,000-year gap between Mesopotamian culture and Egyptian culture origination, as far as we know, through physical evidence. When you couple in that with the slight inaccuracy of carbon dating and the fact that Egypt coalesced into a city center and thus had a solidified religious continuity throughout its culture more quickly than Mesopotamian culture did, then it stands to reason that it probably originated more in ancient Kemet than it would have in ancient Mesopotamia, just given those facts alone. The little inaccuracy of carbon dating, which 200, 300, 400 years might not seem like a lot, but when the difference is only 1,000 years, and then you couple in founding the city-state, coalescing into one solid community, creating culture and religion, it's easier to understand and accept. So with that said, I honestly used to loathe Christianity in every way, shape, and form, right? I was like most witches and pounded on the fact that during the Dark Ages, Christians slaughtered thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the name of God, right? If we really look at it and look at the Bible the way that I believe the Bible should be looked at, as a parable, because it's not a history book, right? If it were a history book, it would be the worst history book in existence, because you can't translate Hebrew directly to English without a gap in understanding. There's some words that don't even translate, let alone translating from Aramaic to Greek to Hebrew to Latin, then to English. It's just a very inaccurate history book, if it even was a history book, and it's not. It's meant to be taken as a parable, as explanations about energy. What we have to accept and realize is that, one, the government of the time, just like the government today, uses Christianity as a way to control the people. Because if you tell them that you're going to eternally burn if you don't do this, this, and this, and you make this, this, and this align itself with your government's goals, okay, then you have a perfect storm for using religion as a basis for government, which is why we have separation of church and state, even though we have in God we trust on our money. Christianity and paganism both can be traced back to ancient Kemet, to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, or to the Hermetica if you want to look at Hermes Trismegistus. But the originator was Thoth in ancient Kemet. The only difference being that paganism uses these energies in connection with the earth. Okay, so we have the earth being reborn in the spring and dying in the fall and being dormant during the winter. And then in Christianity we have Christ being reborn in the spring. But that existed prior to Christianity. The association of that energetic process with a demigod or with a god existed in ancient Kemet, okay, through the god Osiris. Many people use Horus and say that Horus correlates to Christ, but what you have to understand is that Osiris living is Horus dead, and Osiris dead is Horus living, right? Because it'll make sense here in a little bit, but just understand that Osiris and Horus are one and the same, basically, just like God and Jesus are considered one and the same, right? And it'll make sense as we go through the video. So I promise if you stick with me, it will make sense. Once accepting that it was those in power that pushed everything that happened during the Dark Ages, that everybody in the occult slams their fists about, and accept that most of the people that were killed weren't even witches, they weren't even pagan, because most of the real witches, pagans, what have you, were smart enough to stay out of the way. The majority of those that were burned at the stake and hung and things of that nature, and just like what happened here in Salem, Massachusetts in the United States. It was a combination of things, but boiled down to, I don't like this person, they're a witch. And I can prove it because he has a mole. And that's the mark of the devil. That's what it boiled down to, okay? So when we accept these things, we can sort of come to a better acceptance of the fact that the underlying philosophy of the Bible can be taken in a mystical manner. Our beliefs as neo-pagans or as witches can be explained better if we can get a better understanding of the underlying philosophy of the Bible, which comes easier when we accept those two previous facts. In this video, I'm not going to spend a lot of time hyping on the inaccuracies of the Bible. For example, Hebrew, it's not an original language. It's just not. The Septuagint is their claim that Hebrew is an original language, but the Septuagint, the one that we have a physical copy of, is in Greek. There's no Hebrew copy of it, right? So we have a copy of somebody saying, here's a copy of what we believe the original was, but it's in Greek. So we have no physical evidence that Hebrew was an original language aside from what the Bible says. And like I said, it's not a history book. So I'm not going to hype on the inaccuracies. I want to discuss the similarities between the root of Christianity and the root of paganism. Because, as I said, that energetic process being described through the birth and death, resurrection of a physical being existed prior to Christianity in ancient Kemet. And that is where paganism draws that same concept from. And it goes a little deeper than that because Egypt was a big farming community. Egypt, ancient Kemet, was fertile, lush, soil, black earth, right? So we understand that it was the actions of those in power that provoked these atrocities during the Dark Ages and not the underlying philosophies of the Bible itself, right? There's no reason beyond that induced by the powers that were for pagans to not be accepting of the underlying philosophies of biblical theology. If we're going to ask open-mindedness from a historically very closed-off belief system, then we ourselves have to allow a little bit more openness on our part and let go of that fact. Yes, it's a fact, but it's a skewed fact. Very skewed fact. So we have the energetic process. What is the energetic process? The process is that of birth, life, death, and rebirth, right? Resurrection, what have you. All right? You have Christ being resurrected, Osiris known as the Great Redeemer. Yeah, okay, Christ took people's sins, took responsibility for the sins of humanity. Osiris, what does redeem mean? The Great Redeemer. So correlation right there. While we're on the subject of the same energetic process being discussed, it's important to note that both Osiris and Christ revolve their theology and stories and names, anything about either one of these can be traced to the three sacred numbers of 3, 6, and 9. 9 times 9, 81, right? 8 plus 1 is 9. 9 times 2, 18. 8 plus 1 is 9. Anything you multiply 9 by, the answer can be broken down to equal 9 by doing that process right there. And it goes way deeper than that, but that's just an easy explanation to give you an idea of the infinite process of the number 9. The earth, which is what pagans believe is the basis of this energetic process, actually vibrates at 7.83 hertz, which is the same vibratory state as the alpha state of the human brain, the alpha wave of the human brain, 7.83 hertz, which is actually equivalent to the number 9. So it's just an interesting little side note I thought I would throw in there, right? We know it's not a coincidence, right? Because that humans attuned themselves to the earth, microevolution, right? In a way, sort of macroevolution, but both, I guess, in a sense. Let's first look at the initials of Inri, Inri. Inri means Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, right? Most Christians recognize that. It's an easy place to start when you want to try to explain your beliefs and give a common ground between yourself and something that seems completely different. Opposing forces, almost, it seems, but they're not, okay? And we'll uncover this as we go. But Inri, I-N-R-I, can be very closely tied to the Gnostic word of power, Iao, which is a common chant within the occult for manifestation. The easiest way to describe this without a whiteboard, I need to get a whiteboard, I need a couple $1,000,000, I gotta have a whiteboard. Anyway, Inri, I-N-R-I, if we break that apart, I into its Hebrew character, Yod, N is Nun, R is Resh, and back to I, Yod, and we equate those with their corresponding zodiac signs using the tarot, which is a Kabbalistic process, right? We know that the tarot uses the Hebrew alphabet, and that the Hebrew alphabet can be used Kabbalistically. It gets very, very deep, but those that study the occult understand and know this. Just understand that through that association, from the tarot to Hebrew to Inri, we get the zodiac correspondences of Yod, I, being Virgo, Nun, N, being Scorpio, and R, Resh, being Sol, or the sun, okay? And then if we take the ritualistic gestures used in the occult for those zodiac signs, we have Virgo, who represents the Virgin Mother mourning, right? So we have Mary, the Virgin Mother of Christ, and we have Isis, the Virgin Mother of Horus. When Osiris was reassembled after being torn apart by Set, betrayed by Set, we had Osiris return with no phallus, right? And yet he passed his energy on to Isis to give birth to Horus. So we have the Virgin Mother Isis in mourning as well. That ritual gesture is an L. Scorpio, Apophis, the destroyer, is shown through ritual gesture as a V. Sol, the sun, Resh, we have Osiris risen, which is shown this way, right? So we have L, V, X. LVX, right? Or Lux. What is Lux? What it means is the light of the cross. Okay, keep that in mind. The light of the cross. Crucifixion can be loosely defined as making the body into the form of a cross, and understand that Osiris slain is represented by standing straight up with your arms out in this manner. Those other positions relevant, but not relevant to this. So arms out, making a cross, right? Just like Christ upon the cross gives us the crucifix, so making the body into a cross. So Lux, the light of the cross, we have Osiris and Christ, both being the light of the cross. The correspondence there should just kind of roll downhill and make sense, right? And Iao is Isis, Apophis, Osiris, which is the Virgin, the Destroyer, the Redeemer. So we have Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, and King of the Dead. Okay, that's what Osiris is known as, king and a king, right? And both through correspondence seen as the light of the cross, seen as Lux. To refer back to the sacred numbers of 3, 6, and 9, for example, you have Christ being said to have been crucified at the age of 33. So we have 3 right there, one of the sacred numbers. But if you add 3 and 3 together, you get 6, one of the others. If you multiply 3 and 3, you get 9, the third sacred number. However, the same occurs with Osiris. Okay, we have 72 entities present at the supper of Osiris, the last dinner of Osiris. 7 plus 2 is 9. Right? Osiris was torn into 42 pieces by Set. Sometimes 14, but 42 in many of the stories of the myths. 4 plus 2 is 6. Okay, so those numbers occur over and over and over again throughout the mythologies of both Christ and Osiris. So we have another connection in that. And I mentioned about Osiris, though he wasn't technically crucified, we can loosely define crucifixion as the body being made into the shape or the form of a cross, which is how we get a crucifix. Like if you have a cross, it's just a cross. When you put Christ on there, it's a crucifix. But we only ever see Christ on the cross, so we think a crucifix means Christ on the cross. But it means to make the body in the shape of a cross, which is the ritual gesture of Osiris dating back to ancient times, right? That. Osiris slain. Then you have Osiris risen, which is what is on the sarcophagi of ancient Egypt, what the pharaohs are buried in, the sign of Osiris risen. Okay, and what does he hold? Thy rod and thy staff. Technically, it's a staff and a flail, but a flail is simply a rod with flails on the end. Right? Thy rod and thy staff, right? Comfort thee with thy rod and thy staff. So, and when you understand what the rod and the staff are used for, protection and rest and what have you, it makes sense. And if you want to understand Lux a little bit more, we have Christ seen as the light, right? The way, the light, and Horus, who is Osiris incarnate. When Osiris came back, he passed his energy on, and Horus was born, is the god of the sun. the sun goes to the underworld at night and comes back in the day. So we have Osiris reborn as Horus. Again, the light of the cross, right? Jesus is the light of the cross. And there's Pashti again, jumping up on the table, trying to get on YouTube. Come here, Pasht. You want to say hello? Do you want to say hello to the people? Come here. Say hello to the people. Say hello. Hello to the people. Say like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Ancient knowledge. Spiritual wisdom. Posh knows. She knows. Anyway, alright. So we have Lux, Inri, and Iao, right? And that may take a minute to process, so if you have to rewind, get a better grasp on it, but it does make sense when you break it down and do get a grasp on the understanding of it. And to further the association with light and the sun and Christ, you have Christ always being shown with the halo around his head, right? What is that halo? That halo is representative of the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is the sun of our brain. It's the inner sun. So you have the Son of God, S-O-N, being the light, being shown with this bright halo around his head, which is the pineal gland, because science now knows that the pineal gland is bioluminescent and actually glows in the darkness of the brain. So there's another association to Lux with Christ, which can be directly tied to Osiris via Iao. And to continue on this line of thought, Jesus is the only begotten Son of God, right? You have John 3:14, and God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You have Osiris, the begetter, and Horus, his son, the begotten. And again, they are one and the same. So we have another association between Horus, or Osiris, and Christ, right? We have Christ upon his initial death through crucifixion, right? He went to hell. He entered the underworld, right? And as I mentioned, the myth is that Set invited Osiris to dinner, and he made a sarcophagus to the exact dimensions of Osiris's body. And at the dinner, he said, anybody who can get in this sarcophagus that fits, I will give it to you. And it was a beautiful golden laden sarcophagi. And Osiris fit perfectly. Well, when he got in, Set slammed the lid. And when he did, he threw it into the Nile. It wandered downstream and eventually wound up with a tree growing on top of it. So then again, you get another association to wood and the cross and Lux, the light, okay, through the tree on top of his supposed death. Anyway, Isis finds him and takes him back to the land of Kemet, where they're supposed to be at, and he allows, I can't remember who it was, to watch over the body, and something happens that allows Set to actually find this out and rips Osiris into 42 pieces and scatters him across the land. Isis goes around and gathers up all the body parts of her beloved Osiris and reassembles him with the help of the magic of Anubis, at the time, Lord of the Underworld. Osiris became Lord of the Dead, one of the seven in the Judgment Hall. And when his body was reassembled, he didn't have a phallus, which I mentioned earlier, through the Virgin Mother Isis and the Virgin Mother Mary. All right, so he copulated with Isis and gave birth to Horus. Immaculate conception, right? Because he didn't have a phallus. So he just, in essence, passed his energy, a part of his energy, onto Isis, and then moved on to become Lord of the Dead. So with that said, you have, again, Christ dying and entering the underworld, and you have Osiris, upon his final death, enters the underworld, right? And technically comes back because the sun, which is Horus, sets, and when it sets, it's believed it goes to the underworld for the night. And as Horus and Osiris are one and the same, when the sun rises, you have the resurrection of Osiris through Horus. Again, maybe a hard correlation to explain to a Christian, but the correlation exists there. So what I'm giving you, these things exist within the Bible and within the mythologies of ancient Egypt. And it's easy for us to see them and to equate them. But it's up to each individual to understand these things, which is the point of this channel, right? Understanding knowledge to gain wisdom in order to explain your beliefs to your loved ones. It's up to the individual to understand this in such a way that it can be explained. Right? I'm doing my best to explain it to my viewers, be they Christian or pagan. Now that right there was the hardest correlation that I was going to get into in this video, but it's a very deep correlation that makes a lot of sense when understood. Okay, that Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in the Gnostic word of power, which is used in the occult vastly and widely nowadays as a chant of manifestation, Iao. Okay, and they're correlated through the Hebrew alphabet and the tarot and through ritual gesture. We have the 10 Commandments and the 42 Laws of Ma'at. Now, how are they similar? Okay, well, with the 10 Commandments, they're one and the same, really. You have, except with, of course, beyond the obvious, you have 42 in one and 10 in the other, which honestly, 42 just gives you more room for better explanation. And that is a good point to make to your loved one when explaining this. Another good point to make is that with the commandments, you have God demanding that you do this, this, and this, or else this horrible thing will happen. With the 42 Laws of Ma'at, which are the laws that the ancient Kemites abided by, and they weren't so much laws as codes to live by, right? So I do not steal from my neighbor. I do help those in need. All right, so things of that nature. So you're taking personal responsibility for your actions by saying that you do this and you do not do this. So you're literally taking personal responsibility for your own actions. With the 10 Commandments, more like you're scared into doing that thing. And that should, to a conservative Christian, be a very good thing, that you're taking personal responsibility for your actions. Another correlation, we have Christ walked on water in the Bible, right? What does the sun do? The sun correlated with Osiris through Horus, as they're one and the same. Horus is Osiris living. Osiris is Horus deceased, right? So the sun, when it sets every evening, walks on the water. Sets over the ocean, walks on the water. Jesus walked on water. Another easy correlation that can be explained very easily to a loved one and can be understood very easily, right? Because you don't have to tie it clear back to ancient Kemet and get into all this. You can just state that, look, pagans, okay, view the god as symbolized by the sun. The sun walks on water at night, or in the evening rather, right? It sets, it walks on water. What did Jesus do? He walked on water. So the correlation between the two is there. I'm essentially worshiping the same energy and praying to or connecting to the same energy that you may be, right? And that's how you may say it to your loved one. You have Judas, betrayed Christ at his Last Supper. And as I mentioned earlier, Set, at the Last Supper of Osiris, betrayed Osiris. Tricked him into the coffin, slammed it shut, right? So we have the betrayers in both of the stories. What I'm getting at here, if you can't see, is that the Bible is literally pulled from the teachings of ancient Egypt. And that's not hard to understand when you when you understand the fact that Christ in his formative years, and if you know anything about psychology, the formative years of a person are what make the individual who they are. In his formative years, he was raised in Egypt. So it would make sense that the religion and the religious philosophy that he pushes would resemble Egyptian philosophy. That makes sense. Instead of saying, look, what I believe in predates what you believe in. Instead of saying that, we go about it by saying, look, yes, what I believe in existed, and what you believe in existed prior to what either of us believed in ancient Egypt, right? So we're essentially both praying to and acknowledging the same energies. So instead of giving in to the Christian approach of I'm right, you're wrong, instead of instigating that reaction by saying this came first, you say this came before both. And that kind of nullifies that instant I'm right, you're wrong reaction. Another correlation, we have the three kings of, you know, the song Three Kings of Wenceslas. I was in band in high school, so that sticks in my mind, the Three Kings of Wenceslas. And then you have the three magi, or magi, whatever, however you say it, however you choose to say it, of ancient Egypt and the mythologies of Osiris, right? So again, three kings and three kings upon the birth of the child of the Immaculate Conception. It hand in hand, right? I mean, that's pretty convincing sentence on its own, honestly, I think, anyways. And yes, I have notes to remind myself where I'm at on this. It's still difficult, honestly. So hit the like and subscribe button for real, because this was not an easy video. Religious videos are difficult anyway, and then you delve into comparative religious videos of religions that clash and trying to equate them. You understand? So hit the like button for me. It's right there. You don't even got to move you just move your thumb, click. It's easy. I'm playing with you guys, but for real, it helps me. Hit the like button, subscribe. You won't miss any more of my content. So, and if you're learning something, why would you want to miss it? Because, right, knowledge is power. Going back to Lux, that upon the birth of Horus, it's sometimes seen in the mythologies that Hathor, the goddess of fertility, is holding two crosses up to the nostrils of Isis, indicating breathing in the essence of the light of the cross, the essence of Lux. And you have Lux, the light of the cross, being Osiris, who is Horus. Right? So you understand what I'm saying there with the crosses being held to her nostrils, breathing in the light of the cross, the essence of the light of the cross, which is Osiris, giving birth to Horus. And we have Christ turned water into wine, right? So what does the sun do? And this is another kind of stretched out one, but the sun turns water into wine. So the sun, S-O-N of God, turns water into wine. The sun, S-U-N, turns literal water, which rains upon the vine, absorbs into the grape, squeezed out, fermented by the sun, turns water into wine. And another really interesting and important point is we have Christ being the Son of God, right? He says, I am the Son of God and I am the Word of God. I am the Son of God and I am the Word. And in the Pulmonadries, which is the vision creation story in the Hermetic texts, which again were taken from the Emerald Tablets, originally written by Thoth, and when the Greeks went in and allowed the Persians to overthrow the Egyptians and then took over from there, Hermes Trismegistus took the place of Thoth, and many Egyptians' gods wound up in the Greek pantheon, right? You have the god that's not very widely known as Hermanubis, which was Anubis, right? And Hermes together. Hermes Trismegistus and Hermanubis. But within the Pulmonadries, which from the Hermetica, you have, it explicitly states, the Word is the Son of God, and God is the mind. Right? So the main point there is the Word is the Son of God. And Christ, the Son of God, says, I am the Word. It's just word for word in this text, by far predating the biblical text. But instead of saying, mine showed up first, you say, look, it's the same thing. We're acknowledging the same presence, right? So I'm just explaining to you how to get somebody who is so, I'm right, you're wrong, because I've been there. I've done this. I've had to explain these things and help those that don't understand get a grasp on it, right? And it's not easy. Especially if you don't know these things. That's why I'm making this video, so it's easier for you to do this. Then there's a really obvious connection between the creation vision of the Pulmonadries and the Genesis story, being the earth was shapeless and void of light, or formless and void of light. It's said in one of those ways, right? I can't remember the exact phrasing, but shapeless and void of light. It was dark and had no shape. It was just a blob of dark matter. And it stated in the Pulmonadries that the same thing. The earth is shapeless and void of form and void of light. It's dark, right? So the same thing, the same process, which in my opinion is describing the Big Bang, because you have the coalition of molecules, right, making this big formless, shapeless blob, impacted by ice asteroids, slowly cooled down over time. Right, so it begins to make sense. Right? Paganism, Christianity, tied to ancient Kemet, which can be now correlated to science in several ways. One last big correlation that I know everybody's going to say, why didn't you mention this? I'm going to mention this, is the holidays, right? We have pagan holidays, which we know were in existence and celebrated way before Christianity existed, right? But yet somehow we wind up with Christian holidays slapped over top of or right next to pagan celebrations. And that was done for the same reason that the actions taken during the Dark Ages were done, or was done rather, was to stomp out paganism, to overshadow paganism. So they stuck Christmas right beside the winter solstice to overshadow it, even though science can now tell us that Christ was not born in the winter. That honestly probably was known to the Catholic Church back then, but it wasn't a factor because the whole idea was control. We have Easter, or Ostera, right? Easter, the Christian holiday, the resurrection of Christ, or Ostera, the resurrection of the earth. In Wiccan tradition, which is it comes from ancient pagan tradition. People say, well, what does Easter and the resurrection of Christ have to do with rabbits and Easter eggs? The ancient Ukrainian folk art of Pysanky and Krishenka was the coloring and drawing of symbols upon eggs to be buried for various reasons, fertility, what have you. Usually fertility being the beginning of the spring. Pagan tradition celebrated in Christian holidays. You have Beltane and May Day. The maypole and the maypole dance is a pagan tradition, right? You see witches dancing in a circle holding hands, and what do you see on May Day? Little girls, little boys dancing around the maypole, weaving in and out of one another, making one the DNA, the double helix. You have Imbolg and Groundhog Day, a more recent kind of association to paganism. It's a Christian society that we live in, right? And Groundhog Day is a rather recent holiday, but it draws from the idea that on Imbolg it was said that if it rained, that winter would stop and spring would come, because spring brings the rain, And if it didn't rain, that winter would continue for however much longer. So that's the idea of Groundhog's Day. We have Halloween and Samhain, which some Christians won't even acknowledge Halloween. We have all these Christian holidays being slapped right next to pagan celebrations, simply in an attempt to overshadow pagan beliefs. Today, it still goes on, even though science tells us that these things are not the case. It just continues to happen because it's control, right? The control thing probably isn't the best thing to mention when you're explaining this, but the holiday thing is, it's a good point to make, right? Like, we're worshiping and acknowledging the same thing yet again. Even though we know that the way they're placing their holidays doesn't really correlate to the biblical reality, okay? You kind of leave that part out to avoid the argument, because the argument's already there. We don't need to instigate it further. This doesn't only apply to witchcraft or paganism and Christianity, all right? These energies exist throughout all the religions of the world. And you can see that through the existence of the Hermetic principles throughout every religion in the world. So if you want to really get deep about it, Krishna, Zarathustra from Zoroastrianism, Krishna from Hindu, Buddha from Buddhism, can all be traced back to ancient Kemet. It's all the same energy, just being described in different ways according to cultural biases. And when we understand that and accept that, it's easier for us to explain to those who don't understand that how that came to be and why that is. Okay, why we believe what we believe instead of what they believe. And if we can open our minds up enough to allow this process to take place within us and show that to those who are completely dismissive of us, it's my hope that these explanations would be easier for them to accept given that fact, right? So I hope all of this made sense to you guys. Christ and the sun, Horus and Osiris, one and the same, Jesus and God, one and the same. I hope everything made sense, and I hope I articulated it correctly. I hope you have a great evening, great morning, great day, afternoon, whatever time it is that you're watching this video. I'll catch you on the next one. Remember, knowledge is power, guys, and once it's here, nobody can take that away.
They heard it pays, and who the fuck wants to be poor, knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of